Marcus Webb stared at the official reassignment notice floating in his inbox, the holographic text practically mocking him with its cheerful blue glow. After 17 years of mopping floors and unclogging alien toilets on Station Omega-7, this was his reward? This was his big break? Congratulations, the message read. You have been selected for immediate transfer to the prestigious Vorthok Cub Sanctuary position. Prestigious. Right. Marcus had heard the stories. Everyone in the Outer Rim had heard the stories. The Vorthok Cub Sanctuary wasn't a job posting, it was a death sentence with benefits. Commander Thek's bulbous purple form materialized in Marcus's cramped quarters without so much as a courtesy knock. The Gornathian's 4 eyes gleamed with what Marcus had learned to recognize as barely contained amusement at human suffering. Webb. Thex wheezed through his breathing apparatus. Pack your things. Your shuttle leaves in 2 hours. Let me guess, Marcus said, not looking up from where he was scrubbing dried alien vomit off his bathroom wall. The last guy didn't work out. The last 17 guys didn't work out. Tex's tentacles writhed with what passed for laughter among his species. Magnificent creatures, those Vorthok cubs. Such enthusiasm for life. Enthusiasm for ending life, you mean. Tomato, tomato. Thex shrugged, a gesture that involved his entire gelatinous torso, rippling. Look on the bright side, Webb. The pay is excellent. Hazard bonuses, life insurance, full medical coverage, and if you last more than a week, they'll even spring for the premium death benefits package. Marcus finally turned around, his mop dripping suspicious green fluid onto the floor. And if I refuse? Then you're fired for insubordination, blacklisted from every station in the sector, and left to hitchhike back to Earth. Assuming you can find someone willing to give a ride to an unemployed human janitor with an attitude problem. The cosmic joke wasn't lost on Marcus. 17 years of faithful service, and this was how it ended? From cleaning up after aliens to becoming alien food. His mother always said he'd never amount to anything. If she could see him now, she'd probably be proud that he'd finally found a way to be useful, even if it was as a chew toy. The Vorthoks are apex predators, aren't they? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Oh yes, Thex practically purred. Even as cubs, they possess razor-sharp claws, lightning-fast reflexes, and an instinctive understanding of every living creature's weak points. Beautiful, really, like watching poetry in motion. Deadly, deadly poetry. And they've killed every previous caretaker. Well, not killed exactly. Thex paused thoughtfully. Some were merely mauled beyond recognition. Others simply disappeared. We preferred to think of them as having achieved job mobility. Marcus looked around his tiny quarters, at the 17 years of accumulated junk and memories of thankless work. Then he looked at Thex, whose expression suggested he was already mentally composing Marcus's obituary. When do I start? Marcus asked. Thex blinked all 4 eyes in surprise. You're actually going to do it. What choice do I have? Besides, how hard can it be? They're just babies, right? Big, scary, murderous babies, but babies nonetheless. That's the spirit, Webb. I admire your optimism. Misplaced and potentially fatal, but admirable. Thex handed him a datapad. Here's everything you need to know about Vorthok biology, behavioral patterns, and feeding schedules. I'd recommend reading the section on emergency protocols first, specifically the bit about where to run when everything goes sideways. Marcus glanced at the pad. The emergency protocols section was longer than the rest of the manual combined. Any last words of wisdom? Marcus asked, shouldering his duffel bag. Yes, Thex said, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone. Don't try to pet them. The last guy thought they might like belly rubs. We're still finding pieces of him in the ventilation system. The Vorthok Cub Sanctuary looked exactly like what Marcus had expected a baby apex predator daycare to look like, which is to say it looked like a maximum security prison had a baby with a heavily fortified bunker. And that baby had serious abandonment issues. Reinforced durasteel walls, laser containment fields, and what appeared to be blast doors every 10 feet. The previous caretaker's personal effects were still piled by the entrance, like some sort of morbid lost and found. Marcus counted at least 12 different sets of belongings. Apparently, the turnover rate was even worse than Thex had let on. Your new home, announced Dr. Kelvin Voss, the sanctuary's head researcher, gesturing grandly at the fortified nightmare before them. The elderly human looked like he'd been working with dangerous aliens for so long that he'd forgotten what normal fear responses were supposed to look like. State-of-the-art facility, top-notch security, and absolutely no unnecessary safety features. No unnecessary safety features, Marcus raised an eyebrow. We tried those. Turned out the Cubs just used them as toys. Lost 3 good technicians to a modified emergency foam dispenser. Who knew they could weaponize fire retardant? Before Marcus could process that particular horror story, the sound hit him. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, then escalated into something that sounded like a freight train having an argument with a buzzsaw. Ah, Dr. Voss said cheerfully. They know we're here. The blast doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the main habitat. It was larger than Marcus had expected, with multiple levels connected by ramps and platforms. It had probably been beautiful once. Now it looked like a tornado had hit a furniture store, then the tornado had gotten angry about the experience and decided to hit it again for good measure. And there, in the center of the destruction, were 3 of the most adorable killing machines Marcus had ever seen. The first one, about the size of a large dog, had midnight black fur with silver stripes and eyes like liquid gold. It was currently perched on what remained of an observation platform, staring down at Marcus with the focused intensity of a predator sizing up its next meal. That's Razor, Dr. Voss explained helpfully. He's the leader of their little pack. Very intelligent, very aggressive, and very good at coordinating attacks. Notice how he's positioning himself for optimal pouncing angle. The second cub was smaller, with mottled brown and gray fur that seemed to shift and blur at the edges. It had already vanished from where Marcus first spotted it, and was now somehow behind a piece of debris to his left, watching him through the gaps. Fang is our little strategist. Loves ambush tactics and psychological warfare. Yesterday, she convinced the cleaning drones that they were under attack by making shadow puppets on the wall. We lost 3 units before we figured out what was happening. The third cub sat in plain sight, looking absolutely innocent with fluffy white fur and wide blue eyes. It was even smaller than the other 2, and appeared to be playing with what looked like a destroyed security camera. And that little angel is Spike. Don't let the appearance fool you. He's the one who figured out how to hack the food dispensers and reprogram them to launch nutrition pellets at Mach 2. We're still repairing the dents in the walls. Marcus watched as all 3 cubs arranged themselves in what was clearly a well-practiced formation. Razor high for the aerial assault, Fang hidden for the flanking maneuver, and Spike right where he'd look harmless until the moment he wasn't. So, Marcus said, setting down his bag with deliberate slowness, I'm supposed to feed these guys, clean up after them, and keep them entertained without getting murdered. That's the job description, yes. The cubs hadn't moved, but Marcus could feel the weight of their attention. 3 sets of alien eyes studying every gesture, cataloging every potential weakness. It was like being evaluated by a panel of tiny, furry death machines. Well, Marcus said loudly, addressing the cubs directly, I hate to break it to you guys, but I've dealt with worse. Ever tried cleaning up after a Rigelian bachelor party? Trust me, you 3 are going to have to work a lot harder if you want to impress me. The cubs exchanged what could only be described as confused glances. Apparently, their previous caretakers hadn't opened awkward conversation with casual dismissal and a challenge to their professional capabilities. Marcus rolled up his sleeves and grabbed a broom from the supply closet. So who wants to explain what happened to my furniture? 3 hours into his new career as an interstellar babysitter, Marcus had reached several important conclusions. First, Vorthak cubs had the attention span of caffeinated toddlers with access to explosives. Second, their idea of playing involved seeing how many ways they could theoretically dismember him without actually following through. And third, they were absolutely fascinated by his complete lack of appropriate fear responses. Every time he bent over to sweep up debris, Razor would creep closer, claws extended, clearly expecting Marcus to scream or run. Instead, Marcus would just give him a look that said, "Really?" and continue cleaning. The cub would then retreat, looking genuinely puzzled. Fang had tried the psychological approach, making spooky noises from the ventilation system and casting ominous shadows on the walls. Marcus's response had been to call out, "Hey, while you're up there, can you check if anyone left a spare mop head in the air ducts?" Even Spike's innocent act was wearing thin. The little guy kept leaving accidentally sharpened objects where Marcus might step on them, then watching with wide, expectant eyes. Marcus had started a small pile of weaponized debris in the corner, cheerfully narrating each addition. "Oh, look, a plasma cutter configured as a floor spike. That's going in the naughty pile." But the thing that seemed to confuse them most was the humming. Marcus had always been a hummer. It was a nervous habit from childhood that had followed him through 17 years of janitorial work. Today's selection was particularly eclectic, ranging from old Earth classics to whatever commercial jingles had gotten stuck in his head during the shuttle ride. He started with Blue Moon, mostly because the irony of crooning about romance while being stalked by baby predators seemed appropriate. The melody drifted through the habitat as he worked, his voice echoing off the reinforced walls. That's when he noticed the first change. Razor had stopped his stalking routine and was sitting perfectly still, head tilted at an angle that suggested he was actually listening. Not listening for weaknesses or attack opportunities, just listening. "Ah," Marcus muttered, switching to "the way you look tonight" as he started organizing the destroyed furniture. "Didn't peg you for a Sinatra fan." By the time he reached the chorus, Fang had emerged from whatever hidey hole she'd been lurking in and was perched on a broken chair, staring at him with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. It wasn't the predatory focus from before. It was something else entirely. "Blue Moon, you saw me standing alone," Marcus continued, pushing debris into neat piles. "Without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own." Spike had abandoned his innocent act completely and was sitting in the open, those big blue eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that would have been terrifying if it weren't so obviously curious. Marcus paused his cleaning and looked around. All three cubs were motionless, watching him with an attention that had nothing to do with hunting, and everything to do with something he couldn't quite identify. "Well, this is new," he said to himself, then louder, addressing his audience. "You guys okay? You look like you've never heard singing before." Three sets of alien eyes blinked in what appeared to be perfect synchronization. "Oh," Marcus realized, the pieces clicking together. "Oh, you haven't, have you? Heard singing, I mean. Vorthax probably don't do lullabies." He set down his broom and leaned against the wall, studying the three cubs who were studying him right back. For the first time since he'd arrived, nobody looked like they were planning anyone else's demise. "Your parents are apex predators," Marcus continued, working through the logic out loud. "I bet they communicate through roars, growls, maybe some tactical clicking. But melody? Harmony? Music for the sake of music?" He shook his head. "That's a very human thing, isn't it?" Razor made a soft sound, somewhere between a purr and a whine. It was the first non-threatening noise any of them had made since Marcus arrived. "You like that, huh?" Marcus asked, then made a decision that would have horrified Dr. Voss and probably given Commander Thex a heart attack. He sat down on the floor, cross-legged, putting himself at the cub's eye level. "All right then," he said, clearing his throat. "Let's see what else you might enjoy." He started with something gentle, an old Earth folk song his grandmother used to sing. Scarborough Fair seemed appropriate somehow. The melody was simple, haunting, and, as his voice filled the space, something magical happened. The three most dangerous babies in the galaxy quietly crept closer, forming a loose semicircle around the human who had somehow stumbled on to the one thing they'd never experienced before. Marcus finished Scarborough Fair to an audience that was hanging on every note like their lives depended on it, which, given their track record with previous caretakers, might actually have been the case. "Well," he said, studying three pairs of intensely focused alien eyes, "this is either the breakthrough of the century or I'm about to become the first person in galactic history to be murdered mid-lullaby." Razor shifted closer, those golden eyes never leaving Marcus's face. The cub's body language had completely transformed from predatory stalking to something that looked almost hopeful. "You want more, don't you?" Marcus asked, and was rewarded with what could only be described as an eager head tilt. "All right, but I'm going to need to figure out your individual tastes. Can't have you fighting over musical genres." He decided to start with Razor, the obvious pack leader. Something told him this particular cub would appreciate music with a bit more edge to it. "Let's try some classic rock," Marcus said, then launched into Hotel California. The opening lines rolled out in his surprisingly decent baritone, and Razor's reaction was immediate and intense. The cub's ears perked up, his entire body seeming to vibrate with excitement as the familiar guitar riffs translated into human vocal form. By the time Marcus reached the chorus, Razor was swaying slightly, his tail twitching in what appeared to be rhythm. When Marcus hit the high notes in Welcome to the Hotel California, Razor actually made a soft, rumbling sound that might have been purring if it weren't coming from a creature designed to hunt things 10 times its size. "Rock fan, huh?" Marcus grinned. "I can work with that, but let's see what your siblings think." He turned his attention to Fang, the strategic thinker who'd been watching the entire interaction with calculating eyes. Something classical seemed appropriate for a mind that enjoyed complex planning. Marcus cleared his throat and began the opening notes of Canon in D, letting the mathematical precision of Pachelbel's composition fill the space. The effect on Fong was remarkable. Where Razor had responded with enthusiasm, Fong responded with what could only be described as reverence. She crept forward until she was barely 3 feet away, her mottled fur seeming to shimmer as she absorbed every carefully structured note. "Oh, you're sophisticate," Marcus murmured between verses. "Appreciate the architecture of it, don't you? The way each part builds on the last?" Fang made a soft chirping sound that somehow managed to harmonize with the melody. Marcus nearly stopped singing in surprise, but the look of pure joy on the cub's face kept him going. She was actually trying to sing along, her alien vocal cords producing something hauntingly beautiful in response to the classical structure. "Well, I'll be damned," Marcus whispered, then louder. "That was beautiful, sweetheart." The endearment slipped out before he could stop it, and Fang's reaction was immediate. She flopped over onto her side, exposing her belly in what was unmistakably a gesture of complete trust, from a creature that had been planning his ambush 3 hours ago. "Okay, that's 2 down," Marcus said, looking at Spike, who had been unusually quiet through both performances. "What about you, little guy? What makes your musical heart sing?" Spike tilted his head, those enormous blue eyes blinking slowly. There was something different about this one, something that suggested depths Marcus hadn't even begun to understand. On a whim, Marcus started scatting. Not words, just pure improvisation, letting his voice dance around a jazz melody that existed only in the moment. "Bata bata bob, shoo, bee, dee, duva, yeah!" Spike's reaction was explosive. The little cub leapt to his feet, his fluffy white fur practically standing on end with excitement. He began moving, not quite dancing, but something close to it, his whole body responding to the unpredictable flow of jazz improvisation. "A jazz baby!" Marcus laughed, letting his voice climb and dive through complex runs. "Of course you are. The one who reprograms food dispensers loves music that breaks all the rules." Spike made a series of rapid chirping sounds, somehow managing to create polyrhythmic patterns that complemented Marcus's scatting perfectly. It was like having a conversation in pure music, each of them responding to the other's creative impulses. Marcus found himself grinning as he improvised around Spike's contributions. "We're jamming, aren't we? You beautiful, terrifying little weirdo. We're actually jamming together." The session might have continued indefinitely if not for the sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor outside. Marcus wound down his improvisation just as Dr. Voss appeared in the doorway, looking like a man who'd come to collect a body and found a musical instead. "Webb?" Dr. Voss called out uncertainly. What are you doing?" "Apparently," Marcus said, looking around at 3 contentedly sprawled apex predators, "I'm running a daycare." Dr. Voss stepped into the habitat, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. Razor was lying on his back, paws in the air, looking more like a satisfied house cat than a killing machine. Fang was curled up in a neat spiral, purring softly. Spike had somehow managed to fall asleep sitting up, a blissful expression on his tiny face. Dr. Voss struggled for words. "They're calm. Turns out they're music lovers," Marcus explained, getting to his feet and stretching muscles that had stiffened during his impromptu concert. "Who knew that the secret to managing apex predators was a decent singing voice and some variety in your playlist?" Dr. Voss pulled out a recording device, his hands shaking slightly. "This changes everything. Do you have any idea what you've accomplished here? These cubs haven't been peaceful since they arrived. The longest anyone has lasted in here without incident was 47 minutes. "How long have I been here?" Marcus asked. Dr. Voss checked his chronometer. 4 hours and 36 minutes. Marcus looked down at his 3 new fans, who were watching the conversation with drowsy contentment. "Huh. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess. The Galactic Council is going to want to study this phenomenon. The implications for interspecies communication alone..." Dr. Voss was practically vibrating with scientific excitement. "Doc," Marcus interrupted gently, "maybe we could study it tomorrow? I think my audience is ready for nap time." As if on cue, all 3 cubs yawned in succession, showing off impressive arrays of very sharp teeth. But somehow, those teeth didn't seem quite so threatening anymore. "Of course," Dr. Voss whispered, backing toward the exit. I'll let you get them settled." As the door closed behind the researcher, Marcus found himself alone with 3 sleepy apex predators who had somehow become his responsibility. And for the first time since receiving his reassignment notice, he wasn't thinking about updating his resume. "All right, kids," he said softly, settling back down on the floor. "How about a lullaby?" Marcus woke up on day 3 of his new career with what could only be described as the galaxy's worst case of space flu. His throat felt like he'd been gargling with plasma cutter fuel. His sinuses were completely blocked, and when he tried to speak, only a pathetic croak emerged. "Morning, guys," he attempted to say to the 3 cubs who were already awake and staring at him expectantly. What came out sounded more like a dying space whale than a greeting. The cubs exchanged alarmed glances. This was not the melodious human they had grown accustomed to over the past 2 days. This was something broken and wrong. Marcus tried clearing his throat, producing a sound that would have made Commander Thex proud of his vocal intimidation techniques. The cubs backed away slightly, clearly disturbed by this development. "It's okay," Marcus croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "Just a little sick, nothing serious." But to 3 baby apex predators, who had discovered that their favorite human made beautiful sounds that somehow made their world make sense, this was very serious indeed. Razor approached cautiously, sniffing at Marcus with obvious concern. When Marcus tried to hum their usual morning routine, nothing but a painful rasp emerged. Razor's golden eyes widened with what could only be described as panic. "I know, buddy," Marcus whispered, wincing at the effort. "Trust me, I'm not happy about this either." He managed to get through the morning feeding routine, though it took twice as long without his usual narration and songs. The cubs ate their nutrition pellets, but their hearts clearly weren't in it. They kept looking at him expectantly, waiting for the music that had become the soundtrack to their lives. By mid-morning, the cubs were displaying clear signs of distress. Fang had retreated to her favorite hiding spot and was making soft, anxious chirping sounds. Spike had lost interest in his usual creative destruction projects and was just sitting in the corner, staring at nothing. Razor was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, which was particularly disturbing given that he was, technically, a caged animal. Marcus tried humming again, desperate to comfort them, but only managed a pathetic wheeze that seemed to make things worse. The cub's agitation increased visibly. "This is not good," he whispered to himself, then louder, though it hurt to speak. "Hey, it's going to be okay. I'll be better soon." But as the hours passed, things got progressively less okay. By afternoon, Razor had started destroying furniture again. Not the playful destruction of their first meeting, but something more frantic and desperate. He was tearing through the habitat like he was trying to find something, his claws leaving deep gouges in the reinforced walls. Fang had emerged from hiding, but only to begin what appeared to be complex psychological warfare against the surveillance cameras. She was using shadow puppets and reflected light to create elaborate displays that had the security team convinced the facility was under attack by invisible intruders. Spike, meanwhile, had somehow accessed the station's communications array and was broadcasting what sounded like whale songs mixed with industrial grinding noises throughout the entire sector. Ships were requesting emergency rerouting to avoid whatever cosmic horror they assumed was lurking near the sanctuary. "Guys, please," Marcus begged, his voice barely audible. "You're going to get us all in trouble." But the cubs weren't listening. They were spiraling into a collective panic that was rapidly becoming everyone else's problem. Dr. Voss burst through the doors, just as Razor launched himself at the main power coupling, clearly intending to shut down the entire habitat's life support systems. "Webb, what's happening?" Dr. Voss shouted over the chaos. "The cubs have gone completely feral. We're reading massive stress indicators across all biometric sensors." Marcus tried to explain, but his voice was completely gone now. He could only point to his throat and shake his head helplessly. "You've lost your voice," Dr. Voss realized, his face pale with understanding. "Oh no. Oh, this is bad. This is very, very bad." The situation escalated rapidly. Within minutes, emergency teams were suiting up for containment protocols. Commander Thex appeared on the view screen, his 4 eyes gleaming with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as his "I told you so" expression. "Ha! Evacuation procedures are in effect," Thex announced with barely concealed satisfaction. "All personnel are to maintain safe distance while we implement emergency sedation protocols." "No," Marcus croaked, though no one could hear him over the sound of Razor systematically dismantling the habitat's structural supports. "They're not violent. They're scared." The cubs weren't attacking randomly. They were calling for him. Every destroyed piece of equipment, every hacked system, every ear-splitting noise they produced was a desperate attempt to get their human to sing again. Marcus watched in horror as security teams prepared tranquilizer weapons. These weren't wild animals having a tantrum. These were his kids, terrified that the one thing that had brought joy to their lives had been taken away. He had to do something. Moving slowly so as not to startle anyone further, Marcus sat down in the center of the chaos. Razor paused mid-destruction, Fang stopped her light show, and Spike's alien whale songs faltered as all three cubs turned to stare at their human. Marcus opened his mouth and tried to sing. Nothing came out but air and pain. The cubs' distress became almost palpable, so he did the only thing he could think of. He began to tap out a rhythm on the floor with his hands. Pat, pat, clap, pat, pat, clap. The simple beat of "We Will Rock You" echoing through the sudden silence. The cubs froze, listening intently. Marcus smiled encouragingly and continued the rhythm, adding foot stomps despite his weakness. Pat, pat, clap, stomp, stomp, pat, pat, clap, stomp, stomp. Slowly, tentatively, Razor began to tap along with his claws. Fang emerged from her position and started clicking her teeth in counterpoint. Spike, the little improviser, began adding complex polyrhythms with his tail. They couldn't have the music, but they could have the beat. They could have the connection. They could still communicate in the language Marcus had taught them, even if his voice was gone. Dr. Voss lowered his tranquilizer gun, staring in amazement as the three most dangerous creatures in the sector transformed from rampaging monsters back into concerned children, all because their human had found a way to tell them he was still there. Marcus kept the rhythm going until his arms ached, and the cubs gradually calmed down. When he finally stopped, exhausted, they approached him carefully. Razor nuzzled against his shoulder. Fang curled up next to his leg, and Spike climbed into his lap, purring softly. "They were trying to take care of you, weren't they?" Dr. Voss asked quietly, understanding dawning in his voice. "All that destruction, the system hacks, the noise broadcasts. They were trying to call for help." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice even if he'd had one. He looked down at three worried alien faces and managed a reassuring smile. "Sir," came a voice from the communication system, "we're receiving priority messages from 17 different species asking what that beautiful music was and where they can hear more of it." Dr. Voss blinked in confusion. "Beautiful music?" "Spike's whale song broadcast, sir. Apparently it's being hailed as the most moving artistic expression several civilizations have ever encountered. We have requests for concert tours." Marcus looked at Spike, who managed to look both proud and embarrassed at the same time. Even in the middle of a crisis, the little guy had accidentally created interstellar art. "Webb," Dr. Voss said, settling down next to the exhausted human and his three charges, "I think we need to talk about expanding your job description." 6 months later, Marcus Webb stood in what had once been the Vorthak Cub Sanctuary and was now officially designated as the Interspecies Harmony and Music Therapy Research Center. The name was pretentious enough to make him wince every time he heard it, but he had to admit, the upgraded facilities were impressive. Gone were the reinforced blast doors and emergency containment fields. In their place were comfortable living spaces, state-of-the-art recording equipment, and what the designers had optimistically called acoustic enhancement chambers. Marcus preferred to think of them as really expensive music rooms. "Morning, rock stars," he called out to his three charges, who were now roughly the size of large earth wolves, and had learned to harmonize with each other in ways that made professional musicians weep with envy. Razor bounded over from where he'd been practicing what could only be described as air guitar moves with his claws. His technique had improved dramatically, though they were still working on property damage control. "Ready for today's session?" Marcus asked, checking the schedule on his tablet. "We've got the Centauri Symphony Orchestra beaming in at 900, followed by that jazz ensemble from the Rigel system, and this afternoon the Galactic Council wants another demonstration of cross-species musical communication." Fang chirped an intricate melody that Marcus had learned meant, "Do we have to wear the formal recording collars again?" She had developed quite the diva attitude since discovering that her harmonies were being studied by xenomusicologists across 3 sectors. "Yes, you have to wear the collars," Marcus replied, interpreting her question for the visiting researchers who were frantically taking notes. "And yes, I know they clash with your fur pattern. We're working on getting you custom colors." Spike, meanwhile, had discovered electronic music and was currently interfacing directly with a synthesizer, creating sounds that shouldn't have been possible with standard galactic audio equipment. Several engineers had requested permission to study his techniques, but Spike seemed to view his methods as trade secrets. "Mr. Webb," called Dr. Sarah Hendricks, the new head of xenopsychology who had replaced Dr. Voss after his promotion to director of miracle studies, "your 10:30 appointment is here." Marcus looked up to see a delegation of Vorthak adults standing nervously in the doorway. It had taken months to convince the cubs' parents that their offspring were safe with a human, and even longer to explain why their children now insisted on singing themselves to sleep every night. Ambassador Krexthak, Marcus greeted the lead Vorthok, a magnificent specimen who stood nearly 8 feet tall and could probably bench press a starship. How are the cubbed siblings adjusting to the new musical enrichment program? The young ones at home refuse to eat unless we play the recordings you sent, Krexthak rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. My mate has learned to hum what you call Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. It is disturbing but effective. Marcus tried not to laugh at the image of apex predators singing nursery rhymes to their babies. Music is a universal language, Ambassador. It transcends species barriers in ways we're only beginning to understand. Indeed, Krexthak agreed, watching with obvious amazement as Razor demonstrated a complex vocal run that would have impressed a trained opera singer. We have come to discuss your proposal for expanding the program to other Vorthok colonies. The proposal. Marcus still couldn't believe it had come to this. What had started as a desperate attempt to survive his punishment detail had somehow evolved into a galaxy-spanning initiative to introduce music therapy to species that had never encountered the concept. The preliminary data is very encouraging, Dr. Hendricks interjected, pulling up holographic displays of various biometric readings. Stress levels down across all participating species, improved cognitive function in juvenile subjects, and we're seeing unprecedented cooperation in mixed species environments. Plus, Marcus added with a grin, everyone seems to love karaoke night. It was true. What had begun as casual singing sessions with 3 baby predators had somehow mushroomed into the most popular recreational activity in the sector. Last week's open mic night had featured a Rigelian tenor duetting with a Centauri bass, while a group of usually territorial Zephyrians provided backup vocals. The Galactic Council has approved funding for 50 new facilities, Dr. Hendricks continued, each one staffed with qualified music therapy specialists trained in the Webb method. The Webb method. They'd named it after him. Marcus still wasn't sure whether to be honored or horrified that his accidental discovery had become an official xenopsychological technique. Which brings us to the matter we discussed, Ambassador Krexthak said, producing an official-looking document. The Council's offer of the position as Director of Galactic Harmony Initiatives. Marcus looked at the contract, then at his 3 cubs who were now watching the proceedings with intelligent interest. The position would mean a massive salary, his own research facility, and the chance to work with species from across the galaxy. It was everything he'd never known he wanted. It was also a lifetime commitment to staying as far from Earth as possible. I don't suppose this comes with vacation time, Marcus asked, though he already knew what his answer would be. 2 weeks annually, Dr. Hendricks said hopefully. And full medical benefits, including voice coaching and throat protection insurance. Voice coaching, Marcus repeated. 6 months ago I was a janitor. Now you want to give me voice coaching? 6 months ago, interspecies relations were handled through careful diplomatic protocols and formal treaties, Ambassador Krexthak observed. Now they are handled through something you call sing-alongs, and the results are significantly more effective. Marcus watched as Spike began teaching a visiting Andromedan researcher how to beatbox, while Fang demonstrated her latest composition to a group of fascinated xenobiologists. Razor, meanwhile, had apparently decided that the ambassador needed to learn proper rhythm, and was gently tapping out a beat on the massive alien's armored leg. You know what the really funny part is? Marcus said, signing the contract without bothering to read the fine print. My mother always said I'd never amount to anything. Turns out she was wrong. I didn't amount to anything. I amounted to everything. Sir? Dr. Hendricks looked confused. Nothing, Marcus said, scratching Razor behind the ears as the cub purred with contentment. Just thinking about how to update my resume. Do you think Interstellar Apex Predator Whisperer fits on a business card? We'll make it fit, Dr. Hendricks assured him. After all, you're the man who taught the galaxy to sing. Marcus looked around at the research facility that had become his home, at the beings from dozens of different worlds who had come to study the miracle of music, at 3 alien predators who had somehow become his family, and realized something profound. He was exactly where he belonged. All right, everyone, he called out, clapping his hands for attention. Who's ready for the afternoon concert? I'm thinking we start with a little Beethoven, move into some classic Earth blues, and finish up with that new piece Spike composed. Fair warning to our visitors. The final movement includes what we call audience participation, so don't be alarmed when everyone starts singing along. As the various species began arranging themselves for the performance, Marcus caught sight of himself in one of the observation windows. 6 months ago, he'd been a man with nothing to lose. Now he was a man with everything to give. And somehow, in a universe full of impossible things, that felt like the most natural transformation of all. "From the top, everyone," Marcus announced, raising his hands like a conductor. "And remember, in music there are no wrong notes, only interesting choices." The sound that filled the research center was unlike anything the galaxy had ever heard before. Dozens of voices from dozens of worlds, all singing together in harmony that transcended species, language, and the basic laws of physics that said such cooperation should have been impossible. But then again, Marcus thought as he lost himself in the music, the best things in life usually were impossible. Right up until someone decided to do them anyway.